January 30th arrived in Hollywood in a very different way. There were no breaking headlines, no final images circulating across front pages, and no sign at all that a familiar, beloved laugh was about to be gone forever. News of Catherine O'Hara's passing spread quietly, like a backstage light suddenly switching off, leaving the stage emptier than anyone had expected. What shocked the public was not only the loss itself, but the sense that everything happened far too quickly. Just a few months earlier, Catherine had still appeared calm, sharp, and effortlessly graceful. No one saw exhaustion, no one heard complaints, and there was no farewell prepared in advance for the audience. Throughout her career, Catherine O'Hara was someone who made small moments unforgettable. She never needed explosive climaxes to leave an impression. A glance, a perfectly timed pause, or a line that seemed simple on the surface was enough to stay with viewers long after the film ended. Perhaps for that very reason, her passing carried the same quality. No noise, no display, yet leaving behind a space that felt deep and unmistakable. Hollywood that day was not chaotic, but it was heavy. Colleagues, audiences, and those who had worked with her all shared the same feeling. They had not been ready to say goodbye. And it was precisely in that silence that people began to realize how steadily Catherine O'Hara had been present in popular culture. Quietly, enduringly, and in a way that was difficult to replace. For many years, Catherine O'Hara maintained a clear boundary between her private life and her public image. That boundary was respected absolutely, not only by the press, but also by those closest to her. For that reason, the decision by her two sons, Matthew and Luke, to speak out after their mother's passing was not an impulsive act, but a carefully considered choice. They did not appear as the sons of a star, but simply as sons who wanted to put an end to the speculation that was beginning to form. Matthew and Luke shared that for many years, their mother had consciously chosen silence. Not because she was denying reality, but because she believed that some things did not need to become public stories in order to be understood. Their decision to speak was not meant to reveal a shocking secret, nor to alter the image the public had come to love. On the contrary, they wanted people to understand that Catherine's gradual absence from major events or long-term projects was not a retreat from art, but the result of deeply personal, clear-minded choices. In their account, Catherine did not appear as someone quietly enduring a hidden tragedy, but as a mother who maintained control over her life with calm resolve. She did not want the final years of her life to be overshadowed by worry or pity from the outside. Instead, she devoted her remaining energy to her family, to private conversations, and to the sense of normalcy she had always cherished. Matthew and Luke admitted that keeping the truth private for so long was not easy, but it was what their mother wanted. And now, with Catherine having passed in the way she chose, they felt it was time to provide context, not to provoke emotion, but to close the story with clarity and respect. According to Matthew and Luke, Catherine O'Hara had lived for many years with a congenital heart condition, something she knew well, understood clearly, and actively managed. It was not an illness that forced her into long public battles, nor one that sent her repeatedly in and out of hospitals or completely disrupted her work. But it was enough to require her to listen to her body more carefully than before. Catherine approached her health the same way she approached life throughout her career, calmly, privately, and with discipline. She did not share it widely, did not turn illness into part of her public image, and did not allow it to become a reason for others to look at her with sympathy. To her, health was a matter to be handled within the family and among those who truly needed to know. Her sons recalled that their mother was very deliberate in managing her daily life. She kept a regular routine, avoided overworking herself, and maintained a clear boundary between work and rest. If she felt she did not have enough energy, she was willing to say no, something that the younger Catherine of decades earlier might have found very difficult to do. Notably, Catherine never allowed her condition to define who she was. On set, she remained professional, focused, and energetic in every scene. When the camera stopped rolling, she withdrew quietly, without display, without explanation. It was not distance, but her way of preserving strength for the next day. Matthew and Luke emphasized that their mother never saw herself as a sick person. She saw herself as someone living, working, and choosing a pace that suited her. That calm outlook meant that many people around her, even close collaborators, never realized how much she had been adjusting her life in silence. In the final years of her life, Catherine O'Hara did not disappear from work, but she began to work differently, more slowly, more selectively, and more consciously. According to her sons, this was not a sudden withdrawal, but a series of small adjustments carried out so quietly that almost no one noticed. She began prioritizing projects with compact schedules, shorter shooting periods, or environments that allowed for less pressure. Voice roles, short-term projects, or parts that did not demand high physical intensity gradually appeared more frequently in her choices. For Catherine, this was not lowering ambition, but a way to ensure that each appearance remained complete and meaningful. On set, collaborators noticed that she retained her familiar warmth and continued to prepare meticulously for every scene. But once the work was done, she often left earlier than she had in the past. There were no longer long conversations, no lingering out of courtesy. Private time became a priority, and she protected it gently but firmly. Catherine gradually began limiting her appearances at crowded events. Award ceremonies, premieres, and social gatherings, where she once shone with effortless charm, were now considered very carefully. If it wasn't truly necessary, she chose to stay home. For her, presence was no longer measured by how often she appeared in public, but by whether she still had enough energy to honor the commitments she had agreed to. Within the family, these changes became most visible. Her children noticed that their mother rested more during the day, simplified her daily routine, and no longer pushed herself to finish just one more thing as she once had. These were very small changes, repeated over time, but they showed that Catherine was listening to her body, actively and responsibly. What stood out was that even during this period, she never complained or made others feel as though they had to accommodate a star. Catherine O'Hara remained. Catherine O'Hara, discreet, professional, and fully aware of her own boundaries, even as the spotlight gradually gave way to quiet. To understand why Catherine O'Hara could face illness and the later years of her life with such calm, her two sons believe it is necessary to look far back, to her childhood in Toronto. It was not a childhood of luxury or one shaped by stage lights, but years formed within a large family, where discipline, responsibility, and independence were placed above all else. Catherine grew up in a household where everyone learned to listen to one another, wait their turn, and never place themselves above the collective. Her family valued fulfilling one's duties over displaying emotion. These lessons were not taught through lectures, but through everyday habits, being on time, keeping promises, and never blaming circumstances. That environment shaped a very distinct character in Catherine, reserved, practical, and uninterested in unnecessary attention. Even after entering the entertainment industry, where everything seems driven by exposure, she maintained a certain distance from the spotlight. Success, to her, was not something to be enjoyed noisily, but a responsibility to continue doing one's work well the next day. Her sons say their mother never spoke of her career as a privilege. To Catherine, acting was a job, and a job should be done properly and seriously, but never allowed to consume one's private life. She was always prepared for the possibility that things could change, could end, and therefore never tied her entire sense of self to fame. That foundation also explains why, when facing illness, Catherine chose silence and self-management. She did not view sharing her struggles as an obligation to the public. On the contrary, she believed that everyone has the right to keep the most private parts of their life to themselves, a belief rooted in how she was raised, not in fear or denial of reality. For Matthew and Luke, their mother's resilience did not suddenly appear at the end of her life. It had been there from the very beginning, forged through ordinary years in Toronto, and carried with her throughout a long journey, both in her career and beyond. A resilience that was quiet, but steady and consistent until the very end. Matthew and Luke shared that the clearest signs did not come from a major incident, but from very small changes in their mother's daily life. Catherine remained sharp, remained humorous in her own unique way, But her energy was no longer as consistent as before. She paused longer while climbing stairs, ended conversations earlier than usual, and began listening to her body instead of brushing it aside as she once had. What moved her sons most was the change in her attitude toward receiving help. Catherine had always been fiercely independent, rarely accepting care from others. But in her final months, she gradually allowed Matthew and Luke to take on a greater role in her daily life, from small things like reminding her to rest, to simply being present more often during quiet evenings. Not because she had become weaker, but because she had chosen not to resist reality anymore. During this time, Catherine's home grew quieter. She spent more time rewatching old films, not with loud nostalgia, but as a calm way of reflecting on the path she had traveled. She spoke little about the future and expressed no regret over unfulfilled projects. According to her sons, their mother seemed to have gently closed the chapter of her professional life long before, doing so with complete intention. In her final days, Catherine remained at home, just as she had wished and shared with her family. No hospital, no commotion, no curious stares from the outside world, only familiar surroundings, the people closest to her, and the sense of safety she had always valued. She passed away gently, without drama, without long farewells, true to who she had been her entire life, private, composed, and intentional. For Matthew and Luke, it was not a tragic ending, but a completion. Catherine did not leave in fear or resistance, but in acceptance, as if she had already put everything in order for herself before quietly closing the final door of a life fully lived. Catherine O'Hara did not leave behind a loud legacy. She was not defined by grand statements, public controversies, or a legendary image built on drama. Her legacy exists more quietly, in the way people remember characters who seemed eccentric but were deeply real and human, and in the profound respect her colleagues held for her over decades. From SCTV to film and modern television, Catherine represented a rare kind of artist. Someone who never tried to claim the center, yet made every frame come alive whenever she appeared. She did not impose her off-screen personality onto her roles, but became a space in which her characters could exist. That is why her performances, whether as the panicked mother in Home Alone or the eccentric Moira Rose in Schitt's Creek, carried depth far beyond surface-level laughter. To her colleagues, Catherine was a benchmark of professionalism. She was never spoken of through gossip, but through memories of an actor who was always prepared, always respectful of her scene partners, and always kept the working atmosphere light, even on the longest and most exhausting days. Many have admitted that what they learned from her was not only acting technique, but how to endure gracefully in an industry that so easily consumes people. For audiences, Catherine O'Hara's legacy lies in a strange sense of familiarity. Her characters did not need to be idealized. They were clumsy, sometimes excessive, capable of making viewers laugh, yet at the same time reflected vulnerability, affection, and deeply human effort. She turned laughter into a form of empathy, rather than a tool for mockery. Matthew and Luke believed that what their mother left behind was not only a career spanning more than half a century, but a way of practicing her craft. Catherine chose silence when necessary, stepped back when needed, and never traded privacy or dignity to remain under the spotlight. In an era where attention is often seen as the measure of success, she proved that sustainability is the most lasting value. Catherine O'Hara has passed on, but her characters continue to live, not as distant icons, but as familiar figures who return whenever audiences need a sincere laugh, a warm moment, or simply the feeling of being understood. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy an artist can leave behind. Hollywood will move on, new faces will emerge, and new laughter will be created. But artists like Catherine O'Hara are becoming increasingly rare. Someone who did not need noise to be remembered, did not need tragedy to be respected, and did not need constant spotlight to know she had lived rightly. If Catherine O'Hara's story made you pause and reflect, even for a moment, leave a comment below. No need to be long, just share your honest feelings. Don't forget to like and subscribe to join us for more stories behind the spotlight, where talented individuals are remembered not only for how they shined, but for how they lived when the lights slowly faded.